Good afternoon and welcome to the virtual planes for our event today on ransomware. We've got a huge audience tuning in, so thank you to everyone watching at home, watching in your office, and watching on your phones and whatever else, whatever other platform you're using. I think the audience is reflective of the prevalence and the significance of the topic, and dare I say, also the special guest we have today, the one and only Brandon Wales. What I thought I'd do is very briefly introduce Brandon. He'll make a few opening remarks. We will get into a fireside chat, although I'm not sure we need fires right now. It's pretty warm. But we will also take questions from the audience. And I always forget to remind our viewers, if you have questions, please put it in the comment section, whether on YouTube, whether on Facebook, or whether on Twitter, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But Brandon is, as everyone I think is aware, the acting director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security. He's been in that acting capacity since November. Quite honestly, Brandon, I think you deserve a medal for all the hard work you've been doing. No rest for the weary. It's been a busy few months, and I couldn't be happier to have such a steady hand at the helm. Prior to taking the acting role at CISA, Brandon was the senior most civil servant at CISA and was engaged in long-term strategy, policy development, and making sure all the plumbing and the wiring works within CISA and how it can interact with its interagency partners. He's also been at the department or at the agency and its predecessors, NPPD, and don't ask me to remember what NPPD stands for. But he had been running High Track, he had been running OCIA, two of the most important elements around analysis in terms of understanding the challenges, and quite honestly comes to the job with amazing experience, and really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Brandon. I might note we have a large viewership from our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. So I hope we'll have an opportunity to talk about how CISA can interact with SLTT, as well as the private sector, both large companies and also small and medium-sized companies. Since I've never had an unspoken thought, I'm going to turn it over to you to make some comments, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you, Frank, for that extremely kind introduction. And I want to thank you and the McCrary Institute for hosting today's event and for the work that you do, you and your team do year-round to advance the cybersecurity of our country. It's obviously critical. It feeds directly into the mission of our agency to protect and enhance the resilience of our nation's cyber and physical infrastructure. And that's simple to say, but as you note, complex to execute. We are addressing some of the biggest challenges we face, securing large federal networks, particularly in light of recent incidents, responding to ongoing cyber intrusions, securing industrial control systems, and kind of everything in between. But as you know, we're not alone in this mission. We know full well that achieving our goals requires strong collaboration between the public and private sectors, federal, state, local, small, medium-sized, both within the United States and globally. Before I get to the topic of the day, ransomware, I did want to do a short public service announcement related to the one specific example of collaboration with the private sector, and that was the release of the previously unknown vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange products 2 weeks ago. I think as many of your viewers are likely to know, the exploitation of these vulnerabilities is extremely serious, allowing an attacker to gain persistent access and control of enterprise networks. Given the severity, we issued guidance, we issued directives to our federal interagency partners, and I think the importance of which cannot be understated. Things we released told folks to patch immediately, and we're seeing improvements there, but more work needs to be done. We know that threat actors are using these vulnerabilities right now to compromise systems. The vulnerabilities can be scriptable, allowing automated exploitation, and that's just a risk that's unacceptable. We also, and this is where it gets really important, we want organizations to investigate whether they have actual signs of compromise. Patching is not sufficient. because once an adversary gains access to the network, even if you patch those, that actor can still maintain access to your network. And unfortunately, we know from private sector companies that are conducting scans of vulnerable and compromised Exchange servers that there are literally thousands of compromised servers that are currently patched. And these system owners may believe that they are protected, but in fact, they are not. So anyone who's listening, anyone who has the ability to add their voice to this can please have folks make sure that they're patching, but also make sure that they're looking for those potential signs of compromise. We've got a lot of information on what to look for and how to do this on our website at CISA.gov. So would encourage folks to go there. And obviously the information that Microsoft has released, including their one-click tool. There's a lot of good information out there. People really need to do that. When we have vulnerabilities like these announced, the race is on. This is a race between the system owners securing their systems and malicious actors, whether those are hostile nation states or cyber criminals, in terms of weaponizing them. And addressing the increasing scourge of ransomware is high at that list. Trying to get ahead of those cyber criminals who want to weaponize these vulnerabilities for their criminal ends, usually extorting money. And the incidents of ransomware have been increasing exponentially. It's affecting more and more types of businesses and public sector entities. We are seeing manufacturing companies, schools, hospitals. In part, this is being driven by the digital transformation that the country has been going through during COVID, but also the tactics of the criminal actors are changing. They're demanding higher and higher ransoms. Just last week, I believe Palo Alto's research threat analysis unit released a report documenting how ransoms have more than doubled over the past year. And many companies are increasingly being asked to pay twice, first to unlock their systems, and then to avoid having sensitive data that was exfiltrated by the threat actors leaked. So, I like to think about countering ransomware along three primary thrusts. The first, hardening targets, making them more secure and resilient, and this is the area that CISA obviously focuses the most time in and leads. Next, we have disrupting ransomware operations and their payment schemes, which are law enforcement agencies such as FBI and the Secret Service and the Treasury Department and others. And finally, we have the taking the fight to the adversary, actually disrupting those networks, which requires a whole of government effort across intelligence, law enforcement, diplomatic, and sometimes military units working together. So focusing a bit on CISA's work in this area, like most of the work that we do, is really designed around the concept of defending today and securing tomorrow. This means working collaboratively with our federal, state, local, and private sector partners to enhance the security of infrastructure against today's threats and helping to shape the strategic environment over the long term. In cases of ransomware, that means near-term efforts like sharing alerts on new ransomware campaigns, like we, the FBI, and the Department of Health and Human Services did last year when we had credible information on threats to hospitals. It means providing best practices on how to prepare and respond to ransomware incidents, like a guide that CISA and the MultiState ISAC released last year, and our efforts to raise awareness of the threat and what everyone can do, such as our recently launched outreach campaign to reduce the risk of ransomware. It's got a week-by-week focus. This week, we're focusing on the theme of prepare and practice your plan for cybersecurity. That it's not enough to have a plan sitting on the shelf. You need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to do it. You need to know how to do it in the midst of an actual incident. But over the long term, we want to see what we can do to evolve our national level capabilities to block emerging types of ransomware. And we want to look at ways in which we can foster the market for more scalable protective innovations. Because frankly, and this is kind of where I'll close, we have not cracked the code. The ransomware problem continues to grow, and we need more and new innovative thinking on this. And ultimately, if the business model remains viable, if criminal actors can continue to profit from ransomware, we are unlikely to see a significant reduction in the activity from these ransomware operators. And so until then, we need to do everything we can to reduce the likelihood that they are successful when they try these attacks. And I look forward to having that conversation with you today. Thanks, Frank.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you for a great overview, and thank you also for tying it to the recent Hafnium and the recent Microsoft Exchange hacks, because I mean this is real time. this is happening as we speak, and I think it has a significant effect. And I also hope you can steer people. Please don't be shy. Tell them exactly where they need to turn to find some of this information. And the reason I say that is I have helped a number of companies in the past, and in the we normally talk about the fog of war, but when you're dealing with an incident, you have a ton of people who may have thought a little bit about it. They know it matters, but the reality is they're all scrambling when the balloon goes up. So, with that in mind, you mentioned your campaign that you just recently launched, and I'd be curious. I think it's self-explanatory in terms of why, but anything you'd like to add, why ransomware in particular, and please don't be shy here. Point them to resources that they can get their hands on.
Sure. So, Frank, I think, you touched upon it and I touched upon it a bit. I mean, ransomware continues to kind of bedevil the cybersecurity community, in part because these ransomware operators are looking broadly. I think when we're facing up against nation-state adversaries, they've got a purpose behind what they're doing. They're looking for specific information, looking to pre-position maybe for further disruptive attacks down the road. But for ransomware operators, they're looking at anyone, any vulnerable network in the country. Is a potential target for them. It's a potential of ransom and funding for their criminal enterprise. And so they don't care whether you are a small business, a medium-sized business, a local community, a hospital, a big company. They're after the bottom line. It is literally a problem that affects everyone and anyone. And so when we think about why we want to have a campaign to raise awareness, it's because in this case, you need a campaign. We're not going to reach out and touch every person that could be affected by it. We need to make sure that we're raising that baseline across the country. And it's so important to get this out through as many channels as possible.
Awesome. And is there a website you would steer people toward in particular?
Yes. So CISA.gov/ransomware has our information consolidated in one place. Really simple. It'll have the relevant links to the alerts, to the guides, to the guidance we're doing, and to some of our other resources. I think one of the important things that we've done over the past year, which again was targeted towards those small and medium-sized businesses, was targeted towards those local communities from the public sector, was our Cyber Essentials Toolkit, which is basic building blocks for information and cybersecurity programs. Things that are bite-sized and manageable. We released the essentials about a year ago, and then over the course of most of 2020, we released toolkits every month or month and a half or so, with kind of bite-sized things that a business or a small community could do to raise their cyber baseline. Because I think that's one of the issues we want to kind of hammer home, is that this is not a losing battle. If you take if you do the basics, it's highly likely that the ransomware operator will move on to someone else. They're not going to waste their time trying to get into a hardened system. They're looking for the weakest link. They're looking for those really vulnerable entities. So if you're keeping up with patching, if you've closed your forward-facing vulnerabilities, if you've got good anti-phishing measures in place for your email, there's a good chance that these kind of ransomware operators will move on.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. So, I mean, somewhat apt to what we're dealing with right now in terms of responding to a pandemic. You are saying some of the fundamental hygiene is important. There's cyber equivalents of wearing a mask that can be effective. And quite honestly, I highly recommend people do turn to that website because it is really valuable information. So, don't do it on the day the balloon goes up. Try to do it beforehand, but I highly urge people to look it up. CISA.gov/ransomware. So I want to pick up. You would sort of aptly mention that this is everyone's business. I mean, nobody is immune to ransomware and ransomware attacks, but one sector in particular seems to be a primary target, and it's quite prevalent. That's the manufacturing sector. Any thoughts on why?
I think in part that these are systems that are becoming increasingly digitized and interconnected. We're seeing more vulnerable operational technology deployed on the open internet, and the other issue is cyber criminals are becoming more savvy. They know who to target to who has money, and they're going after those systems that those types of industries are using. So unfortunately, increasingly, the more folks who operate inside of in those kind of critical infrastructure sectors are no longer immune. I mean, 5 years ago, we didn't see that kind of targeting from ransomware operators as this was just beginning. Now it's top 3 industries being targeted. I think they know that they have resources, they're potentially vulnerable, and they cannot. Most manufacturing cannot operate because of just-in-time delivery from being down for even a few days without really catastrophic impacts to the bottom line. And so they believe that that is a industry that will pay. And ultimately, like I said at the beginning, if the business model is viable, we're going to see ransomware continue.
Awesome. And I want to build on that because CISA has put out and issued advisories to K through 12 and quite honestly, universities, I think, are in that orbit as well. And there have been a number of incidents hitting the educational sector, as well as the healthcare sector. And I think in addition to ransomware, obviously, they've been a potential target for exploitation and theft of intellectual property and the like. But in those alerts that you had issued, I mean, what are the tangible steps you think everyone ought to be taking? And quite honestly, it's not everyone is to some extent unique, but in terms of the variant of malware, whatever we may be dealing with, but there are a number of strategies that entities should be taking, and just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think some of those are.
Sure. I mean, and again, kind of going back to your example about the pandemic, a lot of this is the basics. Do you have the basic cybersecurity approach for your system commensurate with the amount of risk that you're facing? And particularly as your network is becoming increasingly interconnected, and I think education is a perfect example. As we went to remote education over the past year, we should not be surprised that the incidents of ransomware targeting the educational institutions have increased. But I think along the lines of what we have been preaching during the course of our our awareness campaign on ransomware, do the basics. Do you patch regularly and patch quickly as new vulnerabilities and new security patches are deployed by your critical vendors? Do you have multi-factor authentication on your network? Do you back up your network so that you can quickly reconstitute if there is a disruption? And do you have a plan in place? Do you know who you're going to call? Do you know how you're going to reconstitute your system? Are you planning on bringing in vendors? Do you know who they are? Do you have them on contract already? These are the basics. And then fundamentally, protecting your email, because phishing continues to be the most common method by which ransomware has been deployed. And do you have the right approaches to countering phishing? And part of that is technology, and part of that is on the people. Are you doing the right training to make sure that your workforce knows that they are likely going to be the entry point for ransomware that brings down your network? And so if folks are doing those basic things, there is a high likelihood that they'll be able to either not be targeted in the first place, or be able to reconstitute quickly and have a minimal disruption to their operations, which at the end of the day is what resilience is all about.
Awesome. And I want to pick up on a theme that I know you're passionate about, I'm passionate about, and it's supporting our broader state, local, tribal, and territorial communities. I mean, firstly, our SLTT communities are prime targets for ransomware incidents. They are also potentially very powerful and enabling partners to address ransomware incidents in their communities, and I'd be curious what you think, what CISA is doing now, what more you think it can be doing to support our SLTT frontline providers, and I'm going to put my bias on the table for a second. I can't refrain. But through Solarium Commission, which I had the privilege of serving on, we did put forward a series of recommendations around codifying and designating a cyber state of distress, and specifically tying a cyber response and recovery fund to that. And if you think about it in the physical world, lots of times our state and local partners get overwhelmed in terms of major natural disasters, major epidemics, hostile acts by nation states or non-state actors. How do you think that all plays into the cyber domain? And I'm sure we're going to have some questions from our SLTT folks later, but I'd be curious to help set the stage on why that's important. If you think it is, I hope you do. And I know you do, but what you think we can be doing going forward.
Sure. So I'm going to take a step back and say one of the first things that our state and local partners should do is understand what resources are available to you today, because there are a lot of capabilities that CISA offers directly that are available to our state and local partners, and there are other capabilities that we offer through our partnership and grant to the MultiState ISAC. There are things like malicious domain blocking and response that they have rolled out that's available, that begins to provide value, a protective value to public sector entities. And those don't necessarily have to just be state and local governments. It could be the school districts and school boards and municipal hospitals and others. So there's more that is available to you than you're utilizing today. There are 10, 15,000, 12,000, I forget the exact number of school districts across the country. And I think only a couple of hundred are using some of the services from the MSISAC. So one, go out there, figure out what's available, and figure out how you can gain more no-cost services to you. But I think this does bring up a broader issue, which is the need for more sustained investment. And so last week, the last 2 weeks I've testified before House and Senate. And that was one of the things I was preaching when focusing on the security of the federal government. But it is equally and even more importantly true at the state and local level because of the number and targeting of ransomware incidents that are affecting those ends. We do need to look for ways of improving the sustained investment for cybersecurity across the country. DHS Secretary Mayorkas talked about this a few weeks ago. When he announced that we were increasing the amount of money that was dedicated to cybersecurity in the existing FEMA grants that go to our state and local community from 5% to 7.5%. So that's an additional pot of money that's available for those kind of resources. But he did highlight that he does believe that additional resources are necessary and calling on Congress to work with us to identify what's the right mechanism. And this is on the front end. How do states prepare for incidents, protect themselves, and ensure that they're not actually victimized by either criminals or nation state actors or others. But the point that you raise is equally as important. Are we able to utilize the resources of our country when we need them most? Do we have the resources to respond to catastrophic cyber incidents that could affect our state and local entities, small and medium-sized businesses that are providing critical services and critical commodities to the functioning of our nation? And we believe the answer is yes. More is needed there. And we want to work with Congress to identify what is the right mechanism to do that. Because right now, if there was a catastrophic cyber incident affecting states and they did lack the resources to address it, we would not be able to move as quickly and expeditiously as we need to respond and recover.
Awesome. And I might note that Senator Peters, Senate Homeland Security Committee, and Congressman Langevin and others, I think, are ready to work with y'all to get things done there. I'm going to ask sort of a question that's maybe a little outside of your day-to-day thinking, but when we think about large-scale ransomware operators and operations, do you think we ought to designate them as transnational criminal organizations, which would enable other tools of the federal government, or do we not know enough yet? Do we need to assess that? But I think this is not just disorganized crime. There's some of that, but this is legitimately organized crime as well, correct?
No, I mean, these are definitely sophisticated, organized groups that are conducting these large-scale ransomware operations. And frankly, this is some place where CISA is not in the lead, but we're there to support those agencies that are responsible for this, like the FBI, the Secret Service, ICE, Homeland Security investigations, who are looking at those organizations and attempting to use their capabilities, their authorities, to disrupt their ability to execute their plans. But these are global. These are globally deployed entities. They're around the world. These criminal operations does complicate our ability to go after them. But there's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot that our law enforcement community has done to disrupt this. But the criminal organizations are resilient. They tend to bounce back, find new ways of compromising us. So we have to constantly try to stay one step ahead of them. And that's a tall order, but one I think that the United States government is up to.
Awesome. And I'm glad you brought that up, because some of these operators are living in countries that are in essence being provided safe haven, where we don't have much access, whether Russia, China, and many others. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I also wanted to build on a statement you recently made in a Senate or House hearing. Forgive me, I can't remember which one exactly, where you stated very bluntly that interagency cooperation has never been stronger. So obviously CISA plays a key role, and I think you know that, whether through Solarium or I've got a soft spot for CISA because I clearly want to see them succeed, and I think they're the belly button for what it should look like. But this is a team sport, and at the end of the day, you've got other agencies, whether it's entities that can do collection overseas, which, if you notice some of the recent incidents, maybe there's a blind spot there if servers in the US are being used to exploit that, or law enforcement. And as I think, we do a lot with the Bureau, and I'm a big proponent of some of their mission as well. But shed a little more, expand a little more light on some of your thoughts on how that interagency piece is coming together.
Sure. And so, I think you're absolutely right. This is a team sport. We have often talked about it as what we need to be successful is collective defense. That obviously starts with the federal government that brings a lot of capabilities, unique authorities to bear. But it is also essential that we bring in our state and local colleagues, our private sector, particularly in this space, because of what they can see, what they can do, and the breadth of knowledge and expertise that's a real strength to our country. But I would say that over the past several years, the relationship between CISA, the FBI, NSA, the broader IC, Cybercom, has grown by leaps and bounds. I think a lot of that has to do with being kind of thrown into the cauldron of our election security work over the past couple of years. A lot of national focus, a lot of high expectations from our leaders, both in the executive branch and in Congress, and then our state and local officials throughout the country. They needed and wanted us to work in a unified way to help ensure that we protected our democratic institutions. But I think out of that came a much more stronger, more unified federal government who was capable of kind of working more seamlessly to kind of tackle these problems. So when we have new types of incidents that are outside of the election sphere, like when we had the compromises associated with SolarWinds and the Microsoft Office 365 compromises last year, the relationships were in place. A lot of the processes were in place so that us and the FBI were doing joint victim notification and not kind of tripping over each other. We were immediately working between offensive and defensive sides in terms of what we were collecting, what we were seeing, how we can feed back into the intelligence community, and how they can feed into our defensive mission. That kind of work, I think, is we're just far away from where we were 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that's thanks to a lot of people who worked real hard to build these relationships and solidify them. There is certainly more work to be done. It's never going to be as smooth a process as we want, but I'm really proud of the work that this agency and the entire federal government has done to get where we are today. And I think everything we're going to do going forward is going to build on that success.
That's awesome. And I want to paraphrase, just because I often do, Mark Twain, who once said, "Trust is the coin of the realm." And the reality is I think we're learning the very same set of issues here, whether it's counterterrorism or whether it's cyber. Trust takes a long time to build. It can evaporate in a nanosecond, but it really is important to work toward that. And I hope you can take sort of that interagency scar tissue, lessons learned, and all the good and hard work and the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that, and start expanding that exponentially, as you did for election security with our SLTT partners and even small and medium-sized businesses. I mean, here's the reality: they're not going to be paying attention in many cases until it's too late. I mean, we really want to move as far left of boom, left of breach, left of incident as possible, but easier said than done. I mean, quite honestly, they're in the business of business. So I think that your emphasis and building on some of that and bringing that to the broader national level partnerships is such an integral role. And I think you've been afforded some new capabilities and authorities and bodies, right, in terms of cyber liaison at the state. Anything you want to touch on there, Brandon?
Sure. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our support to our state and local community is critical. We offer a lot of services. We do a lot of partnership. We are talking to our state and local the state and local community every single day. We have already several hundred CISA employees deployed across the country doing cyber and physical security support to state, local, and the private sector, businesses, small to bigs, every single day. And we are expanding that. So as part of legislation that was passed in the National Defense Authorization Act late last year, asking us to establish what we call cyber state coordinators. These are kind of a variant on our cybersecurity advisors who are dedicated to supporting the public sector institutions in every state in the country. Former Director Krebs had already started the hiring process for those folks, and about half of them have already been selected. I think about 20 are already on board, deployed throughout the country. And their job is to work with those state and local officials to make sure that they know what resources are available to them, how to get them signed up for more, and to be a critical touch point between the agency and a critical set of partners throughout the nation.
Well, let us help you get that message out. And once the individuals are selected, to raise awareness of that, because I think that could be integral in terms of not only responding to crises, but also in that day-to-day function. So I think that's a great opportunity and a great capability that CISA is moving forward on. I mean, right now, you've sort of had a government that's still in transition. I think some of the seats are starting to settle, but there's still a little bit of transition going on. I think I know the answer to this, but I'd be curious. I mean, you're going to be dealing with this for a while, right? They're defending against ransomware. There's not an end state. This is a journey, I think. So you're not going to declare victory anytime soon on this particular set of issues, are you?
No, I mean, I think we're not close to the end state that we want to be in, and I think that we've got a lot more work to do to, as you said, kind of reach those small and medium-sized businesses, reach those small county networks throughout the country. That's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's going to take dedication. It's going to take perseverance. All things we have, but it is a journey. And I think one of the messages that we've been trying to share in talking to the bigger companies and to state officials is they are critical to pushing this information down. If you are a large company, you have the ability to push information requirements, help your smaller partners, vendors, suppliers. If you're a state, what can you do to help your counties? And so we saw a lot of best practices during the election when it came from state election officials pushing information down to county officials. They kind of created cyber navigator programs where the state would actually provide people down to their counties to help them. There are a lot of different models out there for how this can work. But that needs to happen. The federal government is only one voice. We think it's an important one, but we need states, we need governors, we need state CISOs, we need large companies to all play an important role in this, in helping bring along the small and medium-sized companies to get them to the security level that's required. You know, in an age when everything is interconnected, when our risks are shared, when my risk is your risk and your risk is my risk, we're always going to be susceptible to our weakest vendor, our most vulnerable supplier. And so the more that we could do to raise that baseline, the stronger we're all going to be.
Before jumping to, because we got a number of questions from people in the audience, and I want to try to get to as many as we can. But before jumping to that, you brought up the multi-state ISAC, or Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And DHS helps enable, 17 ISACs? I'm not even sure what number we're at now in terms of information sharing and analysis centers, but they play an important role. I'd love for you to maybe shed a little more light on the ISAC and the ISAC concept in general.
Sure, and so it's ISACs and ISALs, information sharing and analysis organizations, and there's a number of them have stood up. Originally, they were largely focused on the sector construct, but more and more types of organizations wanted to come together, underneath that banner, with the idea that they serve as kind of central points where information can be shared. In some cases, that information is designed to be shared amongst that organization's members, because that those organizations, those companies in that sector, those states in the multi-state ISAC, there's a lot of good value that they can glean from people who, in other contexts, would be their competitors. And so we have enabled and kind of helped foster these ISACs and ISALs over the past 15 years. We do a lot of information sharing with them to help provide them, they serve a value for us as they're kind of useful belly buttons that we can provide information to and then hit all of their members. I mean, there are ISACs and ISALs with thousands of member organizations, and it's a good way for us to get products, alerts down that last mile that may be too challenging for us to reach directly. The multi-state ISAC is unique because of its role in supporting our state and local community. We provide them a grant every year that enables their operation. They operate a sensor network that helps protect state and local governments, and they operate a variety of other capabilities that are really a top-notch for state and locals to take advantage of. But the ISAC and ISAL construct is a really important one. And it just reflects the nature of that bidirectional information sharing amongst those members and information sharing between those members and the federal government. And so it's something that we think has been a real value to the overall mission over the past, since the department was formed.
Awesome. And I might also note that the stand up and real sea legs that the National Risk Management Center had found. So if you think x-axis sectors, y-axis critical functions, I think there's been a significant level of maturity in terms of how we think about these issues, which I know you were grappling with OCIA, the analysis arm, not Central Intelligence Agency, but cyber infrastructure. But so I think that is something that when you're in this day to day, you don't always have that appreciation. But I think it's starting to.
No, it's really important that model of looking at national critical functions to identify what's truly important. But then that's just the beginning. Then a lot of the work, the value that the NRMC is adding is kind of decomposing that function in terms of What are the sub-functions? What are the companies that are enabling it? What are the technologies that are enabling those critical functions so that we can target our risk management activities? And those risk management activities can be everything from surging cybersecurity services to working with industry on best practices. There's a lot of different ways in which we look at tackling these problems, but it all starts with that. How do we understand the nature of that risk environment? How do we understand what's enabling that risk environment? And how do we best ensure that our security approach is going to add the most value?
Awesome. I'm going to turn to some of the questions, but one last one. I can't let you go. What before I turn it over? Latest on the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange or Hafnium attack. Anything that you'd like to shed some light on in terms of activities, the investigation, and anything we ought to be thinking about?
Sure. So I'll start with the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, where I think again we've seen some good progress recently. A lot more servers are getting patched. But again, we are still concerned that there is still too many unpatched servers, and there are too many servers that are patched with underlying compromises. And those system owners need to take aggressive action to remediate. And if they're not capable of doing so, please try to bring in someone who is capable of helping you remediate your network, because ultimately your system is at risk. You could be used to attack third parties, or you can yourself be disrupted. And to the extent this could be criminal organizations, ransomware is highly likely. When it comes to the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange Microsoft Office 365 compromises from last year, I would say, the victim space is largely solidified now. We're not expecting to see a lot of new victims from that. I think, different from the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability risk is there's a relatively smaller universe, still quite large, of companies that are utilizing things like SolarWinds, Orion network management software. You tend to have to be a bit more sophisticated operation to need and utilize that type of network appliance. So we don't expect to see a lot more victims, but in the past few weeks, CISA has released some new information and tools designed to help understand whether they've been compromised, including a new tool called CHIRP, which stands for the CISA Hunt Incident Response Program. And it's actually a tool that you could run on your network and on your SolarWinds device, and it will help utilize a large number of the IOCs, many of which we had identified from some of our incident response activities, and it will determine whether the system has been compromised, whether the actor had moved laterally off your SolarWinds device. So it is another resource out there for people to do further investigation. So while I think we're not expecting to see many new victims, we want to make as many resources available out there to the community to help with their detection and response efforts, and we'll continue to do so. We're obviously doing a lot of work focusing on our federal interagency colleagues who were compromised as part of this campaign, but we're trying to take all the lessons we learned from there and share that information broadly so that our state and local and our private sector partners can benefit just as much.
And I'm glad you brought up hunting within your own systems. That's a big part of it. We're never going to simply firewall. I mean, we've got to do all the patching, we've got to do all the firewalling and everything else we all know we need to do. But even that is insufficient. So so I'm glad you brought that up and some of the proactive steps entities are taking. Let's turn now to the questions. So we'll start with, because I'm biased, one of Auburn's great researchers, Daniel Toritz, who is part of our broader family. He's asking for your assessment on the threat posed by ransomware to the OT sector in particular. And we're doing a lot of work marrying up the IT and OT sectors, and I know CISA is steeped in some of this activity. But curious about as the threat to the OT environment and how universities can better engage with CISA or owner operators to counter these threats through the research and development needs, the R&D needs going forward. So OT, thoughts there. For transparency, the McCrary Institute is named after the great Charles McCrary, who was CEO of Alabama Power Foundation, Alabama Power for a number of years. So you can bet the grid is near and dear to us. So thoughts on that?
No, it is. I'd say it's an increasing risk. We've now seen ransomware targeting OT systems, targeting control networks, which a few years ago we had never seen that really before. Now it is more common. We had an incident in the past week where we had a water facility that had its OT network compromised. Now, in that case, the impacts were minimal because the system was only used for monitoring, not actually for control. So it didn't really have a significant effect. But the principle is the same. And many places that do use their OT systems for control may have similar vulnerabilities. So as you noted, CISA does a lot of work in the industrial control system space. We have for many years have a real significant set of capabilities and partnerships at both the vendor level and with the community that with the ICS community. We released a strategic plan on securing ICS systems late last year. Going to an earlier point, the subtitle was a unified approach, really reflecting the criticality of collective defense in the ICS space. And so I would say if you're an OT system and you've got any touch points with your business network, or even worse, if you've got OT elements that are touching the open internet, there's risks. And those risks are real, and increasingly ransomware operators are looking to target those. One of the new authorities that CISA received with that passage of the National Defense Authorization Act last year was administrative subpoena authority. This would allow us, if we see vulnerable control systems on the internet, in the past, we probably could not see further than their ISP in terms of who the actual owner of that control system was. With the new admin subpoena authority, we'll be able to, if we identify vulnerable control systems that are internet facing, and we can't reach that owner another way, we'll have the ability to serve an administrative subpoena on their ISP and be able to make contact with that company. We're not going to be regulating that company, but we want to be able to talk directly to the owner and say, you've got a vulnerable system, it's out on the internet, and we found it today, but tomorrow a malicious actor could have found that, exploited it, and your system could have been down, or worse. So we think it's an important new authority, one that the agency has been pushing for a couple of years, and we're actually getting ready to bring it live as we finished up some of our procedures and training in the next 60 days or so.
Awesome. And I've just got to put a little footnote in here for, what are we calling sector-specific agencies now? I'm forgetting what the SSAs
Sector risk management agencies.
So there you go, even better. But also DOE and some of the work they're doing out of the Office of Electricity and CISA becomes very important on some of these matters. But in terms of some of the R&D needs, I think that what we're learning is very different communities culturally, but it's a shared risk that they're facing, and quite honestly, a lot of the OT community was built to prevent 3 Mile Isles and other sorts of natural disasters, as opposed to security in mind. And bringing that all together, I think, is very important. So thank you for that. I also want to be able to ask a question here. We got a bunch of media, but let me make sure we get one more state and local, or maybe two. First is from Brian Hastings, who's the director of the Alabama Office of Emergency Management. And he's asking, and this is a tough question, it gets to sort of that cyber distress, how CISA defines large regional cybersecurity incidents in terms of catastrophic, and what that definition could in fact be, and how you classify the size, type, and risk magnitude of cascading local cyber attacks. So basically a lot of the same challenges we go through in terms of Stafford Act, in terms of natural disasters. How is CISA trying to get its arms around that? And I'm going to piggyback that with a question from Jay Mosley, who is the runs the Alabama Fusion Center and also is the Homeland Security advisor for the state of Alabama, who's asking, how does Alabama make sure we're taking full advantage of what CISA has to offer? And I think a number of states are organized differently. And so we'll piggyback those two, and some hometown cooking. We need to ask the good questions from our good partners in the state of Alabama. So over to you, Brandon. Oops, we lost audio.
Frank, can you hear me now? We had some network congestion issues. Can you repeat the first part of the first question before you from Brian Hastings?
Absolutely. So his question was sort of asking scale, how you classify and determine something that we kind of know from scar tissue and history in the physical world, whether Mother Nature, or in the hostile world, whether a bad actor. But I'd be curious what your thoughts are there in terms of designation of a critical cyber incident. And then to piggyback that
Sure.
with
yeah, I heard the second question. So so if you actually the schema that we use for classifying cybersecurity incidents is publicly available. It's called the cyber incident severity schema, and there's some details of it inside of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan, which is publicly available, and it's something that our team uses every day. We get large numbers of cyber incidents reported to us, and we actually have one of the folks in our cybersecurity division who sits shift work on the watch floor, has got the responsibility for doing initial triage of all the incidents we receive, and they use that score identify now again, that may not necessarily translate fully into if Congress was to pass some type of cyber state of distress. I think there's probably more work that we're going to want to do there, but I think it provides the foundation for kind of how we think about it, the factors we use, like what type of system is being disrupted, how prevalent is this, the downstream impacts on public health and safety, and economic impacts or national security impacts on the country. It's kind of all captured in there. A question on how to make sure that you're utilizing the resources. I would say get in contact with us. I will give you a very simple email address, central@cisa.gov, central@cisa.gov. That goes to our kind of watch floor, and they can link you up, particularly for our state and local colleagues, with our field-based personnel. So with our cybersecurity advisors, with our regional directors, if required, with our protective security advisors, depending on exactly what you're looking for, and they can help walk you through what services we can offer, which ones are scalable quickly, which other ones maybe a bit more, maybe a waiting list for, because they're more personnel or resource intensive, but just how to get you included in our framework, how to make sure that you're getting access.
Oh boy.
To get to the right.
Awesome. I think we're having a little bit of network congestion here, but I'm going to try to ask two more questions. Brandon, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to try to get two, because we've got to make sure we let our media partners ask questions. The first is from Sean Lingas at Cyberscoop News, and he's asking if you're still confident that no federal civil agencies have been compromised by the Exchange server attack, A, and we'll double tap this one with Eric Geller at Politico. And how has the lack of the national cyber director affected or not affected your work? Obviously, I'm a little biased in there, but I'm glad I don't have to ask the question for once. So first one is Microsoft Exchange, and then the second is on NCD.
Sure. So we're actually still working with a couple of federal agencies, and we have been for several weeks since the initial vulnerabilities were identified to kind of review their network traffic and identify whether there were any compromises. So I don't want to be too definitive because we could get information that could change based upon the results of our investigation, which is ongoing. As to the question from Eric on the National Cyber Director, I think we've been very lucky to have a good friend of this agency and an extremely capable, knowledgeable a cyber professional with Ann Neuberger at the White House as Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emergency Technologies. She has been helping to coordinate the federal government's efforts since January 21st. And I think she's done so. I think she's done an excellent job. I don't know that there's been any diminution in capabilities because we've had Ann and now without having a National Cyber Director as of yet.
And last question before we wrap up is from Troy Turner, who was a longtime editor-in-chief of Opelika and Auburn News and has served in many major media markets in the past. And he's asking if we need to encourage more crime fighters on the local and state level, sort of where they fit in and whether or not there are federal resources to help from a training standpoint.
Yeah, there's a lot of training opportunities. In particular, the Secret Service and the FBI do a lot of training for state and local law enforcement related to cyber. The Secret Service operates their National Forensics Training Institute down
Hoover, Alabama.
Down in Hoover. Where they do a lot of training. The FBI brings folks both there working with the Secret Service and also does work at their national training center in Quantico. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of collaboration. The FBI has created those cyber task forces at each of their field offices where they have local law enforcement brought in along with relevant federal partners. Local law enforcement are a critical force multiplier in this space, and I think that they're definitely a key partner.
Awesome, Brandon. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. You did a phenomenal job, painted a major landscape in terms of the various threats you and the agency and the women and men you lead at CISA and elsewhere. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your time today. Keep fighting the good fight, and dare I say, we're really lucky to have you at the helm right now. So thank you. And any parting thoughts? Over to you, sir.
No, thank you. I think it was a great discussion. I think we touched upon a lot of the critical issues that we're grappling with, and they're going to be important ones for this agency and for the entire United States government to address over the next several years. And I'm looking forward to playing a key role in it the entire time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And that is a wrap.